Hey leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baritone Advisors. We're also recording live from the Return.com studio. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel as well, so make sure you're subscribed there. And as always, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's added value to your life, it would mean the world to me if you'd leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, in today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with Megan Hyatt Miller. If you're unfamiliar with Megan, let me just tell you a little bit about her. Megan is the President and Chief Executive Officer at Full Focus and the co-host of the popular business podcast, Lead to Win. She is also Michael Hyatt's oldest daughter. She is committed to helping her team win at work and succeed at life while also delivering phenomenal results to their customers. Under her leadership, Full Focus was named as one of Inc. magazine's best places to work for 2020, which ranks the top companies in America for their employee engagement. When she's not taking the company to new heights, she's fully present at home with her husband Joel and 5 kids in Franklin, Tennessee. And I think you're really going to enjoy my conversation with Megan. You'll hear her talk about the lessons that she's learned from her father, Michael Hyatt, who's a legend. You'll hear her talk about why getting your mindset right is the foundation to building a successful life. You'll hear her talk about how to win at home and at work. And we also talk about adoption and a bunch of other things. And of course, I take her through the lightning round. I think you're going to love Megan. But before we dive into that, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baritone Advisors. The financial advisors at Baritone Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baritone Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baritoneadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baritone Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny, and my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I also want to thank our new sponsor, Return.com. And leader, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had an interest in investing in real estate? Well, now for as little as $500, you can become a commercial real estate investor. Just visit Return.com to learn more. That's REITURN.com. Investing involves risk. Please consult the Return Offering Circular if you're interested in investing. And with all that being said, here's my conversation with Megan Hyatt Miller. Megan Hyatt Miller, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. As I was just telling you before we jumped on to recording, I've been a huge fan of your company's work and your father's work before the company was started for well over a decade. I was looking for a personal productivity tool for literally years. I tried every app you could imagine. I tried every notebook you could imagine. And then I saw the Full Focus Planner come out, and I've been using that since it came out in the beginning. It's been a game changer for me. So I'm very big fan and just grateful for your work. And I just really wanted to start off with talking about your leadership development journey. Right now, you're the CEO and president of Full Focus. And I'm just curious, as you've built and developed that company with your dad, what are maybe 2 or 3 leadership lessons that you've learned along the way to get you to where you are?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Doug, thanks so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to be with you, and thanks for your kind words about the Full Focus Planner and the work that we do here at Full Focus. That means a ton. As I've gone through this journey at Full Focus, a couple things just come to mind. I think the first is it never goes exactly like you think, and if you're listening to this and you're a parent or you're obviously a leader yourself, it just, things evolve in a really interesting way. And I think most of us would say some of the most important things in our life, we couldn't have necessarily planned for exactly. There were lots of surprises, lots of twists and turns, and it's so much about how you respond to those. And certainly having a vision is critically important. We talk about that a lot at Full Focus, but I think the humbling part of it is, this has turned out at Full Focus to be more significant, more impactful than we probably could have ever planned for. And I think most of us would say that that's true in our lives as we look at our journeys. That's one thing. I would also say that the people are the most important part of the journey. My dad often says that if your dream isn't big enough to require a team, your dream's just not big enough. And that's certainly been true at Full Focus. I credit so much of our success to the people that we have on our team, the culture that we've built. And I would say that's a huge part of the work that I do, is investing in them, investing in the culture, because culture really is that unseen force that drives operating results. And I think sometimes it can feel kind of squishy or soft, but in reality, it's the bread and butter of what we do. And then I think the last thing I would say is that constraints really drive innovation. And that's been true for us at Full Focus. It's certainly been true for my own leadership journey. In addition to being the CEO of Full Focus, I'm also a mom of 5 kids, 3 of whom are adopted. Ages 21 to 3. So I'm really busy with that. And I've been really intentional about using constraints to help maximize my contribution within the business, but also at home. So I leave work every day about 3:00 so I can be present with my family. But I'm not willing to sacrifice our financial results in the business. So I've had to be very focused on my contributions, part of what we help our clients do.
Wow. Yeah. You guys wrote a book I think it was last year or the year before, called When It Works, Succeed at Life.
Yes.
I'll get into that more later, but you brought up the area of constraints and how you have to be home by 3 p.m.
Yep.
I'm curious, are there any other constraints that you have all either personally done for your work-life balance or for the company that's really made a significant difference practically?
Yeah. One of the things that we have done for quite some time, the day of the week has changed, but we have had a meeting-free day every week. Currently it's Wednesdays, and that's been true for a couple of years. And so we have meeting-free Wednesdays, and that's huge for me. I mean, I think for many leaders, you find yourself in meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, because that's really where a lot of decisions are made. But then what happens from a personal margin standpoint is there's no time to do all the ancillary work, the action items that comes out of those meetings, the emails you need to send, or the opportunity to do kind of deep solo work around projects or ideation. And if we don't carve out that time, we're probably finding that our work is overflowing into the early part of our day, our weekends, our evenings, which is ultimately not a good thing. Or we just don't have time for the kind of thinking work that ultimately is going to drive our businesses and our teams forward. And so just carving out that day forces us to ask hard conversations about the meetings that we have and how we can get the other work done. And I think that's really beneficial.
I'm going to be implementing that in my organization immediately. I'm curious, when you announced that to your team, I'm picturing, did everyone get out a box of tissues and start crying because they were so disappointed? What was that day like and how did the staff respond to that? Yeah,
I think probably the opposite. I think it was more like they cheered, because I think otherwise people just feel like, gosh, where am I supposed to get all this stuff done, and actually execute on the things that I've committed to in these meetings? And so I think people love it. It's one of those things we keep coming back to and having to recommit ourselves to, because I'm sure you experience this, Doug, in your life, in your organization. There's always more to do than there is time to do. There's always one more meeting you wish you had time for, or one longer meeting, you wish you could go another hour or half hour. And so the constraints really force us to have to make hard decisions about what's most important. And I think that's really healthy.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about your leadership journey within Full Focus. You didn't start as the president and CEO.
I did not.
And I'm imagining, and again, I actually don't know what you were doing prior, but how have you had to grow personally as a leader? It's obviously, your dad is a legend, right? Michael Hyatt has impacted a lot of people. How have you had to grow to step into those shoes? And obviously you're your own unique person. You're not your dad. How have you had to grow to take that role? Because clearly, from everything I'm hearing, you're doing an unbelievable job. And so kudos to you for your leadership journey.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Well, no, I did not start out as the CEO. Thankfully, that would have been a little terrifying. Actually, after I adopted my middle boys, who are now 12 and 14, from Uganda, I had decided to quit my job. I was in development work in the nonprofit space previously. My background is actually in marketing. And I was staying home with my kids for about 9 months. And I decided that was not for me after 9 months. And so I came to work with my dad about the time he started this business. And I was just working part-time at the beginning. So kind of humble beginnings. And within a few years, the business just really took off. And I ended up becoming the chief branding officer, and then, which marketing, was kind of in my purview at that point. And then I became the COO, which was an intentionally transitional position into the CEO role. And I was there for several years. And what was great about that was the ability to kind of incubate the CEO role in a 2.0 version. When you're the founder and CEO, that's different than being an incoming CEO following the founder. And so I had the benefit of kind of making that job my own, but also having my dad mentor me. I can't imagine a better mentor and coach. And that's really a lot of the relationship that we have even now, which is really special. But that was a multi-year journey before that transition happened. And I think he's done a great job of letting me be my own leader. I don't feel like I have to be Michael Hyatt number two. I feel like I can be myself, and yet obviously I draw from so much that I've learned from him and have the benefit of his coaching and mentorship in the process.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is it like being CEO and president? I spent time with a lot of executive leaders, and the thought is always the same. They say, "Man, you don't know the weight of it or what it's like to be in that seat until you were in that seat." So sitting in it, what has that been like?
Yeah. I think that's fair. I mean, I really came into this role in that pandemic space, which is a heck of a time to take over the reins of something, in a really unprecedented, at least in our lifetime, a series of events. And so there were lots of challenges that I faced, external challenges, internal challenges, all those things. And it was an incredible learning ground, and it was a lot of pressure. I think that part of what I had to do was to learn how to handle the pressure, how to decide what was really an emergency versus what just felt like an emergency. I've been really intentional about my own journey of self-awareness and growing in that as a part of my leadership. I would say the hardest part of the job we were talking about at the beginning is the people part of the job, because that's what makes everything work. And it's also what makes everything not work if it doesn't work. And so just managing the people part of it, especially during such an intense season. I was just talking to my good friend, Ian Cron, who is a well-known expert on the Enneagram and also leadership coach in his own right. And we were just talking about kind of the latent PTSD of the post-COVID period that many teams and individuals are experiencing, and just the leadership challenge that presents.
Wow. What's your Enneagram?
I am an Enneagram 4 with a 3 wing. So, yeah.
And what's the 4? I don't have them all memorized.
Yeah. The Enneagram 4 is the individualist. And so it's very concerned with being authentic and idealistic by nature, very people oriented and empathetic, but tends to be a little bit more introverted, which I am. And it's a little unconventional for a CEO, but I think it served me well in that I'm very in tune with people, very intuitive, and for the people part of this business, that's a good match, I think.
Yeah. And I didn't know you were in development prior. So I'm a development director for a rescue mission in Pittsburgh. And
wow.
I've been in that for 5 years. So yeah, fun connection there. Yes. So what type of nonprofit did you work
with a school that does a lot of racial reconciliation work.
Wow. Oh,
awesome.
It's
pretty great. Yeah.
Yeah. Development's a lot of fun.
It is.
You mentioned your dad. I have to ask this in the interview. I'm just curious, you've obviously were raised by your dad and mom, but also I've got to sit under his leadership. What would you say are the top 1 or 2 lessons that you've really taken from his life and leadership? Yeah,
those come to me right away. So first of all, he is so willing to admit when he's wrong. I've never met anybody in my life who is quicker to say he's sorry and to take ownership and responsibility. I don't have vivid memories of that as a child. It's something, I don't know if it was because that's something he developed over time, or if that's just, I became aware of it kind of more in my adult, young adult years. And certainly, as I've been in a professional relationship with him. But that is one of the things that's really enabled our partnership, and we're now business partners, to be so good, is that he's so willing to admit when he's wrong or when he has something to learn from. And that in turn inspires me to do the same. And so as with my own kids, I want to be that way with them and my team that I'm serving as well. So I think that's a big thing. The other thing that he really learned growing up that he passed on to me is that you don't have to be an expert at everything to succeed. You just have to find the person who is the expert, and leverage their knowledge and expertise. And it's, back when I was a kid, I remember this is like pre-internet, which is really dating me, but, it was like, you just need to find somebody who's written a book on this or some magazine article or somebody that you can talk to. And of course, now it's easier than ever because everything is just right at our fingertips on our phones. But I think that's really empowering because I think a lot of young leaders or new leaders feel like they have to have mastery over everything they're going to need to know to be successful. And it's just not the case. You just have to be good at finding the answers. And that's something we can all do.
Yeah. I want to get into the content that you guys create specifically through books, but you do a lot more than just produce the Full Focus Planner at Full Focus. Can you give people, we've been talking about your leadership, can you give people kind of the scope of your work at Full Focus?
Yeah, well, definitely the Full Focus Planner is a big part of that. That's really a tool that helps people connect their annual goals to their daily actions. There's lots of planners out there, but for us as a company that's really a goal achievement company, we wanted to help people close the gap between the goals that they set, usually at the beginning of the year, and how do you make those a reality? How do you go from goal setting to goal achievement? And so the Full Focus Planner is a big part of that. The other thing that we do from a goal achievement perspective is that we have a very successful coaching program for small business owners called Business Accelerator. And part of what we're trying to help our clients achieve besides their biggest goals is what we call at Full Focus the double win, winning at work and succeeding at life. And we want our clients at Business Accelerator to be able to grow and scale their businesses in ways that they never thought possible while freeing up more time, more margin in their life for their priorities outside of work, like their health and their most important relationships, because we really believe that true success has to include winning at work and succeeding at life, not choosing one or the other. And so it's very satisfying to me. Every week I get to talk to our clients and hear reports from our team about the success of our clients who came to us working, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours in some cases a week, to cutting their workload back to a manageable level and being able to show up for their kids' soccer games and, for anniversary dinner with their spouse while seeing the best results I've ever seen in their business. And that's what gets me out of bed every morning. I just love those stories.
So good. And we were talking before, but one of the sponsors of this podcast, Bergo Realty, their CEO and founder, Andrew Reichert, is a good friend. And he went through the Business Accelerator and he got so much value out of that. I know he speaks very, very highly of it. So leaders, if you're listening to this, I really want to encourage you to check that out. We'll include links to all of that in the show notes. I talked a little bit about content. You guys are content machines. You have a podcast. You come out with a book, I feel like, every 6 months, but they're so good. So I want to dive into a few of your books. And the most recent one is called Mind Your Mindset. And I'll just leave this really open-ended to start. But why did you guys write this book? And what do you want leaders and readers to get out of it?
Yeah. I'm so excited about this book because if you have any familiarity with the work that we've done up to this point, we've done a lot of work in the areas of leadership and productivity and work-life balance. But Mind Your Mindset is really the prequel to all of that. It's probably the book that we should have written first in many ways. And the reason for that is because all of those other books that we've written, all the work that we do, really requires a paradigm shift. We're really asking you to embrace what we would consider kind of like a third option. It's not the obvious this or that. It's something else entirely, like I was talking about with the idea of the double win, winning at work and succeeding at life instead of one or the other. And so Mind Your Mindset is all about the neuroscience that shows that success starts in our thinking. And what I mean by that is that there in our brain, there's what happens to us, the sort of almost boring circumstances of our life that would show up on a medical report or a police report. And then our brain, which is a sense-making machine, essentially, layers a narrative or a story on top of those events to make sense of them. And the stories that ultimately we're telling ourselves, and we use in the book this idea of a narrator, if you ever felt like kind of a voice in your head talking to you all the time. In fact,
James Earl Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. And we call that the narrator. The narrator, is trying to help you take action in your life that ultimately is going to align with the stories that it's telling. And its default stories are going to be about safety, security, keeping you out of trouble, which are not always aligned with what we're trying to create in our lives, with our goals, with our highest purpose and contribution in the world. And so if we want to have different results in our life, which I think all leaders do, we want to achieve bigger and better things, or we want to get past areas where we're stuck, we don't just need to take different actions. And I think most people like you and I are very focused on action. It's like, oh, what strategies am I going to use today? What new tactics can I try? But in reality, those actions are the direct result of this thinking in our head, the stories that we're telling, because those stories predispose our brain to go look for solutions that match. And so if you have a story that is disempowering to you about what's possible with yourself, with the world, with other people, you're not ever going to have access to the kind of solutions and actions that will ultimately change the results you're getting. And so for my dad and I, in writing this book, we feel like this is a huge missing piece for leaders and just individuals of any type who want something more in their life, but have hit some kind of roadblock and don't quite know how to get there. If we can unlock the power of our thinking, particularly using neuroscience, there's so much more possible than we ever realized.
Yeah, this is so interesting. And as I was hearing about the concepts that you shared in the book and listening to the podcast that you shared about it, I actually went back to my childhood. I don't have time to share my whole story, but basically troubled childhood. My mom got sick when I was in middle school. She ended up passing away my senior year of high school. So I watched my mom basically suffer for a long time. Yeah. I was a drug dealer in my high school, all these different things. And again, I was a person of faith. When my mom passed away, Christ came into my life. Yeah. And at that same time, it changed everything for me. But really, it was I got invited to a Bible study that my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, obviously, but my wife's mom led. And long story, my wife's family ended up, for whatever reason, feeling led, I don't want to say to officially adopt me, but they really brought me into their family and showed me a totally different story of what my life could look like. Yeah. And totally different mindsets, literally in every area of my life. The fact that, hey, you should go to college, you're a leader. And they gave me different narratives to tell myself. Yep. And as I was, thinking about your book, it was just like, oh my gosh, that's absolutely right. And I heard a statistic once with, kids who have a troubled childhood, the number one way that they actually can get out and rise above the circumstances they were in is if someone shows them another way. And so I guess, is that what you're basically saying through this book? And how can people start to even identify some of the negative stories they have in their life? It may just seem like it's just common to them. I'm just curious, how can they start to pay attention and notice stories? Well,
you're so right. I mean, these stories really are things we take for granted because, first of all, most of us, no one ever sat us down and said, by the way, there's what happens. And then there's what you say about what happens, or what your narrator says about what happens. And you're actually telling yourself these stories all the time, which are predisposing you to certain actions, which lead to the results. I mean, most of us, that is like a really novel concept that our parents didn't tell us, our teachers didn't tell us, nobody told us. So if you feel like, is this really happening in my head? You're not alone. Or if you think to yourself, gosh, I'm so negative. Like I have all these negative things pop in my head all the time. That's totally normal. And I think there's a real space for self-compassion there because your brain just is doing what it does. It's trying to keep you safe. But first of all, just realizing that this is how the brain works, that it wants to make sense of things and that it is telling us stories all the time is the first step to awareness. And in the book, we talk about 3 steps in Mind Your Mindset. The first step is to identify the story that you're telling. And so the easiest way to do that is listen to the sentences that pop into your head, particularly as you're thinking about things that aren't working well in your life. Maybe there's something you want for your health that's different than what you're experiencing now. Maybe you're trying to pursue a goal in your professional life that's just feels elusive to you, or there's a relationship issue that you have with someone. If you'll listen to what pops into your head, and usually it sounds like they're always like fill in the blank, or it would never be possible to fill in the blank, or I could never. Those are oftentimes what these stories sound like. And then we move into step number 2, which is to interrogate the story. And we've all heard about this idea of affirmations where, you kind of go from, I think this thing about myself that's negative and I'm just going to believe the opposite, which is positive, and usually it's like grandiose and positive. And the interrogate step is so important because it actually sets us up to believe a different story. If we skip the second step, our brain is going to be pretty dismissive oftentimes of a new story because it's going to be so out of congruence with the original story. And so what we want to do when we're interrogating is we want to try to shake loose a little bit or sort of like disconnect that connective tissue between the facts of what happened. Remember, these are like things that are boring. Many times it could be written in a police report or a medical report. And the story that our brain is layered over the top. And we might ask ourselves something like, if I brought in somebody off the street, would they have the same stories? Is this absolutely true? Or might it be a subjective interpretation? And all you're trying to do, again, is just kind of loosen those up. And then you go to the third step, which is to imagine a better story. And this is really where we reclaim our agency or claim it for the first time, because maybe we didn't even realize we had the ability to intentionally guide our thoughts and make our narrator instead of the enemy our ally. And we start to imagine, I tell a story in the book, and I'm happy to tell it here about a fear of public speaking and how I conquered that. But I went through this exact process of imagine a better, or rather identify the story that you're telling, interrogate the story, and then imagine a better story. And ultimately, that's how I was able to get through that fear and come out on the other side.
That's so good. And again, I can't stress the importance of this. I want to move on to the next book, but is there anything else? Again, we'll include links to this in the show notes. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about the book with leaders? Yeah,
well, I would just say that this is one of the most powerful ways that you can develop self-awareness so that you can get out of your own way. I mean, sometimes the biggest obstacles we have are ourselves, looking in the mirror. I had an experience this week where I was telling a story to myself that caused me to take actions that were really problematic. And once I realized it, I was like, oh, I have a choice here. I can do something different. That's not the only way I can interpret this. And I can take some really different actions that ultimately led to a much better result. And so this is one of those hidden levers of success, I would say, as a leader that you can't afford to ignore. And it's deceptively simple, but incredibly powerful. So I would love for people to get this book, Mind Your Mindset. We have some cool tools that are available for free when folks get the book, wherever books are sold at mindyourmindsetbook.com/L3. There's a self-coaching tool. There's a course you can go through. And then there's the audiobook file that you can download. So I'd love for you guys to take advantage of that, because this is, for me in my own leadership, this has been the biggest difference maker of anything that I've done.
Yeah, it's so good. And I think the way you set up was so perfect that really this is a prequel. Leaders, how can I do more? How can I achieve more?
Yes.
And we never take the time to lay the solid foundation on the front end. And so I love that setup. The second piece of content I want to talk about is your book. And we already talked about it a little bit. Win at Work, Succeed at Life, Succeed in Life. And I'll just start here because you talked about defining the double win and allowing people to get more freedom. It sounds like you already know the answer to this, but I think the question a lot of leaders ask is work-life balance actually realistic and possible in the world we live in?
Yeah, I think it is. But it's not magic. I think that sometimes it gets presented to us as like some people are just, I don't know, they have some magical power that enables them to be naturally good at this while the rest of us just struggle. And I don't think that that's possible. I think that in reality, when you establish constraints in your life, what time you're going to leave the office, whether or not you're going to work on the weekends, what are really critical pieces of engagement with your spouse, with your children, if those are relevant to you. It forces a kind of decision making about what is your highest and best contribution. And when you get focused on your highest and best contribution, and you, as a leader, you really become a master at delegating other things that are not your highest and best contribution, what happens is you're actually able to achieve more by doing less. So there's no magic to fit 80 hours of work into 40 hours. I mean, that just doesn't work. What you need is to be able to get 80 hours worth of results from 40 hours of work, for example. And I think that's what we really talk about in Win at Work and Succeed at Life, is developing a vision for that double win, winning at work and succeeding at life, such that now you have these constraints in place that are going to force a kind of clarity and decision making around how you spend your time that enables you to get the results you need, but through kind of that third option, a different way to achieve the results that ultimately is way more efficient and gives you the margin you need for your life outside of work.
Yeah. And can you talk about defining what the double win looks like? Yeah. One thing I love about everything you do in Full Focus, for me, I think about you start with a life plan of, hey, here's what I want my whole life to look like. And one of the most useful tools, as we're talking about work-life balance, that I believe you guys developed is the ideal work week.
Yes.
And actually getting I love what you said, how that getting very clear on what you want that to look like. And I think a lot of times people think work-life balance, and they have a really vague idea. And I think that's the whole problem. Can you talk about actually narrowing in and defining what that looks like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's important to realize like this is going to look different for everybody. For me, it looks like working about 30 hours a week, give or take, and being done every day at 3 o'clock approximately so that I can be home when my kids get home from school or pick them up from school. That's what I want. Those are my priorities. My children, when they were young, had some special needs. And I really felt that it was make or break for me to be present with them. And so that was critically important. It's also critically important for me to take care of my body, to exercise in the morning, to focus on nutrition. And I mean, I'm a CEO with 5 kids, so it's not like I've got time just coming out of my ears. I'm very, very efficient with how I do this. But for me, those are the edges that I know are going to enable me to perform at my best. And I think one of the things that is easy to discount is that work-life balance, or having the margin you need outside of work, actually drives results. So we're not saying, I'm going to sort of back off of the results that I'm committed to as a leader so that I can have a more balanced life. That's not what we're saying. We're actually saying if you want the best results, if you want to reach your full potential, you need to have margin to care for yourself, because otherwise you're not going to be able to make your highest and best contribution. So it's just deciding, what are my priorities outside of work? And then what is my greatest contribution inside of work? And how can I set my weeks up and my days up so that I can make a highly effective contribution in a limited amount of time, so that ultimately there's time to be home for dinner, or travel and have a vacation that's unplugged, or whatever that means to you. But take the time to answer that question. What would the win look like for me?
You mentioned, a really successful key tool to use once you actually define that is delegation. I'm just curious,
Yes.
You work with so many leaders, and I'm
Yes.
sure so many of the executives that you work with are doing way too many things that they should be delegating.
Yeah.
What advice do you have just generally for leaders when it comes to the art of delegation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is something, we have hundreds of business owner clients. I'm a coach myself. I work with CEOs and business owners on a nearly daily basis. And so, yes, this is one of the pain points people come to us with. And it's also one of the things they have the most insecurity about. They wouldn't use that word, but I can say that from a coach's perspective.
Yeah.
And the insecurity really is, I feel like I could do it faster myself. I don't have time to slow down and, teach somebody how to do this, or it's faster if I just do it myself, or I never get the results that I want when I delegate. And in reality, this is where, we have to kind of think with a bigger picture. First of all, you have to ask the question, what's my time worth? Would I be a good steward of the financial resources of my organization if I was paying, say, a software developer or a web developer my hourly rate? If I took, my vacation days out of the mix and I divided my annual take home pay by the number of days that I actually worked, less, all the vacation stuff and weekends, would I pay somebody that? And the answer is probably no. You're probably paying someone double or more the market value for the work that they're doing. And that would be a terrible investment, especially when you consider that you're probably not that good at it, So you're overpaying somebody who's underperforming, and that person is you. So I think that is helpful in the persuasive role in our own brains. But then the how-to, the reason that we don't get the results we want from delegation is because we're not explicit and concrete with why we want to do what we want to do in terms of a delegation, and then exactly what we're expecting to see. And if we'll take the time, and it really takes usually 30 minutes to an hour for a pretty significant project to delegate to somebody. It's not like it's going to take you half a day or even several hours. It's not that long. We have a tool we call the Vision Caster that we use with our clients for this particular purpose of articulating the vision you have for something you want to delegate. But if you take the time to explicitly say, this is why I want to do this. These are the key features. These are the outcomes that I want to achieve with this project. And then you let the person ask you questions, and then you give them feedback along the way. That's when you succeed at delegating, and your confidence builds as the leader, and your capability is built in the person that you're delegating to. And I think this is the step that's usually skipped, because we would just love it if people could read our minds. And unfortunately, they can't.
That's so good. Another thing you challenge leaders to do in the book is to have a hobby or to get a hobby, which few leaders I'm sure do. Talk about hobbying. Why do we need a hobby and how should leaders get one if they have no idea what a hobby outside of work looks like?
Totally. Well, the reason we need hobbies is really twofold. Number one, our brains need a break. Again, this is a performance strategy. This isn't just like some warm and fuzzy thing about, work-life balance. That would be awesome. No, if you want to show up and do your best work for the long haul, you have to give your brain a break. And we talk about this in Mind Your Mindset a lot. Have you ever had that experience like where you get in the shower or you go take a walk and you've been struggling with something in your mind and you suddenly just like have this breakthrough and like a light bulb, all of a sudden you see the solution, right? Have you had that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Well, what's happening is that when we're not directly thinking about something, our brain uses this part of itself called the default mode network, which is not available to our conscious brain. It's not as fast as our executive function and the left part of our brain, but it's very, very creative. It's very productive, and it will make novel connections between things when we kind of let it do its work. And that's what happens when our brain is at rest. And so when we have a hobby, we're creating space for many times our very best ideas. The other thing is that too many of us vest all of our identity, our meaning, our satisfaction in our work. And it's not healthy. It can become addictive. It can become just way outsized in our life. And if we're going to be an interesting, full-orbed person, we have to have things outside of work that we care about, that matter to us, that we invest in, that ultimately when we step away from our work someday or in some way, that fill that void of meaning and purpose and significance. And so the mastery of hobbies is a really important part of that.
It's so good. Well, thank you for that book. And part of that work-life balance is the home life. And you already talked about you have 5 kids. You were one of 5 kids, I believe, as well. So one of 5 girls, which I'm a dad of 4. So we have 4. We have 2 girls and 2 boys, all under 6. So
oh wow, you're busy.
Yeah, it's madness. But I am curious. Like I would love to just hear what you're learning.
Yeah.
But either based on your childhood with 5 siblings, or raising a family of 5. What are you seeing that's working when it comes to raising your family well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's nothing more humbling than being a parent, right? Especially when you've got a bunch of kids at all different ages. I mean, every day there's a new challenge. Every day, somebody changes. There's just kind of constant things going on with that. And so it's very humbling. I feel like parenting is probably the best training ground for leadership that there possibly is. The interpersonal challenges, the conflict negotiation, the need to get alignment from people who don't necessarily have to give it to you, the mentoring and coaching and trying to help your kids become their best selves. I feel like it is so valuable from a leadership perspective. I draw lessons from my parenting all the time as I'm facing challenges as a CEO. And so, it's not to be discounted as its own leadership school. I will say that for sure. I have really enjoyed, as my kids are getting older, my youngest is 3, but my next youngest is 12. So we have a big gap.
Okay,
we have almost like 3 separate families. We have adults, we have middle and high schoolers, and then we have a toddler. Wow. And so, as my kids have gotten older, I have loved moving into the coach's role with them. And I've loved having the opportunity to share this mindset work with them because, gosh, if someone had been able to tell me that when I was a kid, it would have enabled me to avoid so much wasted time, so much frustration. I was thinking about my son, Jonah, who's 12, plays golf, and he's just learning. And if you play golf, it's very complicated. It's a lot of pieces to put together. And so he was going to these clinics and learning one discrete skill for a number of weeks. And then finally it was time to actually play. And when he got in the car after his lesson of having played the game, I could just tell in his body language, as he's walking to the car, shoulders are slumped, heads down, like this did not go well, So he gets in the car and I said, "Hey, bud, how did it go?" And he goes, "Not good, Mom." And I said, "Oh no, what happened?" And he said, "Well, I'm just terrible at golf. I'm just terrible. Can I please quit?" And I was like, "Why? Why would you say that? You love golf." And he said, "Mom, every time I hit the ball, it just went in the opposite direction of where I wanted it to go. It's so embarrassing. I'm terrible. Can I please quit?" And I said, "Wait a second. What if you're just learning?" what if golf is complicated and you've been learning all these pieces and now you had to put them together, and that's going to take a lot of practice. And some of the other kids in your group, they've been playing for many years. And what if you just gave yourself permission to learn? What kind of actions do you think you take if you believe that? And he goes, well, probably really pay attention to my teacher, and I probably would practice at home. And I said, well, what kind of golfer do you think you'd be? And he said, I think I'd be a great golfer at the end. And I said, well, what if you just thought you were terrible and you just didn't have what it takes to be a good golfer? What actions would you take? And he said, well, probably quit. And I said, well, then what kind of golfer would you be? And he goes, well, I wouldn't even be a golfer. I would quit. And I was like, exactly. And I love those moments when our kids are open and we get to shepherd them in that way, because just like adults, sometimes we can't see things for ourselves and we need somebody else to come alongside us. And I love that aspect of parenting.
It sounds like your kids are pretty blessed to have a coach as a mom as well.
Well, they might not always say that, but sometimes they would.
That's hilarious. Adoption, you mentioned, is also a part of your story. And anytime I get to interview someone that has adopted kids, I'm just curious, what have you learned about adoption? And, what advice would you give to those parents who may be considering adoption?
Yeah. So my younger 3 children are adopted. My middle 2 boys, who are now 14 and 12, were adopted from Uganda in 2011 at ages 3 and 14 months. And then in 2019, we adopted our baby girl, who was born at 27 weeks, 1 pound and 2 ounces from Orlando. And it's been quite a journey. So international adoption, toddler adoption, infant domestic adoption, like we've really done it all, 2 at the same time, which I would not necessarily recommend. That was a little bit crazy. But, really what has been amazing and hard about the journey is that when children are available for adoption, it's because they've endured some kind of unbelievable tragedy. I mean, children are not supposed to be available for adoption. They're supposed to be raised by their biological parents. As you know from your own story, that you shared a few minutes ago. And so I think to realize that adoption is choosing to be on a therapeutic healing journey as a family. And it's not just helping your kids heal. It's really the whole family that's involved. And so we have been on a really interesting and challenging and beautiful journey of attachment therapy and many different therapies and all of that. And that also is very humbling, because it's bigger than, we're capable of healing on our own. It's a God-sized endeavor. And so I think that we've been unbelievably blessed by it, and nothing has challenged us more. So I certainly wouldn't be idealistic about it, but I would be very sober about it and undertake it with a lot of wisdom and just humility for what's ahead. And if you have that desire to step into difficulty and really the suffering of someone else and walk a healing journey with them, it can be an amazing, amazing thing, but it is challenging for sure.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for doing that as well. I want to talk about, I have to talk to you guys about creating content. Right?
Yes.
So you've written multiple books. We have a lot of aspiring authors listening to this. What advice do you have, just open-ended, to people who want to write, publish, and then it's not just doing those 2 things, market and get their book out into the world? Yeah.
Well, the first thing is you have got to be passionate about whatever you're going to write about and talk about, because you're going to do it a lot. It's going to take a long time to write that book. You're going to write it. Then if you publish with a traditional publisher, that's, like a 1 to 2 year process. And then you're going to do a gajillion interviews and you're going to speak about it. It's kind of like if you're a professional singer, you're going to sing the same hits over and over and over again. So it really needs to be not opportunistic, like I could do this. It needs to be like, this is my message. And if I will talk about it till kingdom come, because it's so central to who I am and my purpose in life. I think that's really critical, because people can tell, they can tell if it's just, something to kind of check the box. But nothing will credential you more or be more impactful for your career than a book. It's really, it really demonstrates your level of commitment to your message and your expertise. And I think that's huge from a marketing perspective. We have a great publishing relationship with Baker Books, that they're our publisher, and we've done a number of books with them and we'll continue. And they've been a great partner on the marketing side, on the PR side and so forth. internally though, we do all the marketing of the book itself. They do primarily the PR and we do the marketing because that's part of the capability that we have internally. So we really partner on that. And I think providing things for people, like I was sharing with you earlier, these opportunities we call bonuses kind of in the marketing space, but things like courses, extra tools to go deeper in the content. Those are great ways to motivate people to engage with your book and also to really get the transformation that you promised. I mean, I think that's for us, when we think about content at Full Focus, we're all about transformation. How do we shorten the distance between where people are and where they want to be around the topic that we're talking about, whether it's work-life balance or mindset or productivity or leadership, those areas, we want to shorten that distance and help do the heavy lifting for people. And I think if you can do that for your audience, it just adds so much value.
So good. Same question with podcasting. Obviously, I'm a fellow podcaster,
yes,
and I'm always looking to learn and improve my craft. So anything you've learned about podcasting that has been helpful throughout the journey?
It's funny because we have done many iterations of our podcast over the years. And I think I've been on the podcast maybe for at least 5 years. I can't quite remember. It's long enough that I don't remember the beginning of it. And what we have learned over time is the best podcasts are really conversations, they're coming out of things that we care about and that we're passionate about. My dad and I do the podcast together. It's called Business Accelerator. And that's been really key, and you also have to make it interesting for yourself as the host, because if you're not interested, you won't want to do it, And so I think that being willing to change the format and being willing to pursue things that are interesting to you. I think all of our audiences, whether that's 2 or 3 people or whether that's hundreds of thousands or millions of people, they just want to know you. We all want to know people, not because they're famous or necessarily because they're accomplished, but there's just that human desire for connection. And podcasting is a really intimate medium. You have these headphones in somebody's ears while they're walking or getting ready in the morning or taking their kids to school or, in between things in life. And it's a great medium for connecting with your audience in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your podcast. I listen frequently and I love the conversational piece. I want to dive into what I call the lightning round, just a bunch of fun questions that I ask in every interview. And the first one is just, what is the best advice you've ever received and who gave it to you?
Oh gosh. I think the best advice is kind of what I said about my dad earlier, that there is, you don't have to be the expert at everything. You just have to know how to find the expert. And to me, that is so empowering and so freeing.
If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
This is funny. I saw this the other day on a meme, and I feel like this is life, this is business, this is everything. It said, "We don't do it because it's easy. We do it because we thought it would be easy."
That's beautiful.
Doesn't that feel like everything? I mean,
yes.
Everything important you've ever done is that.
I think you're the first guest ever to use a meme.
I know that's not very profound, but I did find that to be very relevant and funny.
That's awesome. What's 1 or 2 meaningful books that you've read in your lifetime that you either gift most often or that you would recommend most often?
Okay. My 2 favorite business books that I refer people to all the time are Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Just absolutely love that book. It's in my top 3. And then The Culture Code. And I cannot remember the author of that right now, but that's my favorite book on culture. I'm reading it for the second time. I'm about to lead my team through it. And I absolutely love it. And those are 2 that I just keep coming back to over and over and really shaped our culture.
Yeah, Radical Candor. So good.
So challenging, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. Kim's incredible too.
She is.
What's something about you that you wish people knew that they may not know?
That I'm really introverted.
Are you?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I do a lot of forward-facing things like this, speak and so forth. But at the end of the day, I'm really just happy to be home with my family and have a quiet night at home and kind of not see anybody. So recharge.
Yeah. I know you spend time with a lot of leaders in a coaching context, and this may be the same answer, but I'm curious. You get to spend time with a lot of high-level leaders. If you get to have dinner or a meeting one-on-one with someone that you look up to or admire in leadership, do you have a go-to question or 2 that you always ask?
I don't. I feel like I should, though. That's a great challenge. I mean, I think that what I find that I do in those situations is I try to be quiet and I try to ask a lot of questions and really listen. And I listen to how they talk about the problems that they have and how they think about the opportunities that they have and how they think about their own leadership, I think is fascinating. Because usually what you'll hear in my experience with the highest level leaders is a lot of humility and a passionate commitment to growth. That they're never at the end of it. They're always learning and growing, and they're really focused on serving. And everybody has their unique flavor on that. And I find that to be really inspiring.
This is a new one. I just got this yesterday in an interview that I did, but what is your biggest regret that you can at least share with us that led to a meaningful lesson in your life?
Well, I didn't tell the story while we were talking, but I think my biggest regret is that I didn't have access to these tools around mindset. I really just believed everything that I thought, and how that played out for me, I'll just tell this really quickly, is I had a debilitating fear of public speaking for over 2 decades that happened, lodged in my psyche when I was in high school. And I spent decades avoiding anything where I had to use my voice, and really got to a crossroads where my team asked me to do a keynote in front of 800 people. Can you imagine? That's the very first speaking event I'm going to do. And I reluctantly said yes. I went through a 6-week period of just looking that fear in the face, because it had confined my life to such a degree that I had said no to so many opportunities, including, by the way, publishing a book along the way. And I finally decided I didn't want to live in that small story anymore. And it was time to write a new story. And that's really the catalyst for all this mindset work and delving into neuroscience in Mind Your Mindset. But it was also a huge turning point in my life and my career. And my only regret about that, I'm glad I figured it out eventually, but I hate that I wasted 2 decades getting to that point. And hopefully that's redeemed, and that I get to share that story and help other people avoid the same fate.
Yeah, leaders, I hope you're listening to this. Changing your story can literally save 2 decades worth of regret in your life. Like that is powerful. Mm-hmm. And okay, we'll move on just for time's sake. Biggest leadership pet peeve?
People who, as Brene Brown would say, want to be right instead of get it right.
Ooh,
I think that is such a profound concept that my husband tells our kids, knowledge is the enemy of learning. When you think it's the absolute antithesis to growth and learning. And I think that the more successful we become, the more people think we know everything. And that's a real trap.
So good. I don't know if you have an actual bucket list or not, but what's something that you've done or crossed off your bucket list in your lifetime that you believe everyone should experience before they die?
Well, I would say spending a significant amount of time in Uganda, in a culture that was very, very different to the one that I live in every day. I think that it made me realize how much we have in common with each other, regardless of what we look like, where we come from, our socioeconomic status, geographical location, et cetera, and also how beautiful our differences are. I think those 2 things are true simultaneously. And it's one thing to read about it or watch a movie about another culture that's very different from your own. And it's such a gift to actually be immersed in it and have the experience of, in my case, being a minority, which I've never had the experience of at that level before. And that was really eye-opening for me and really positive.
If you can go back and have coffee with yourself at any age, and you would have actually listened to yourself, what age would you have coffee with yourself, and what would you tell that version of Megan?
Well, the would I have listened is the real question mark, and I guess we'll never know. I probably my 8th grade self. That was my hardest year growing up. It was just so brutally painful. I was a really awkward middle schooler at a very kind of bougie, private middle school. And I felt so out of place, and like I just didn't fit. And I think I would go back and tell myself, don't worry, it's all going to come together. Like you're going to be okay. And I think that you don't know that when you're that age, but you know that once you're an adult.
Yeah. At the other end of your life, looking back, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be?
I want to be remembered for loving well and being faithful to the people that I had stewardship for and of. And I think that I ask myself that question a lot. What does faithfulness look like now? I have a really profound sense. Another thing that I've really learned from my dad, really profound sense of accountability to God, to return what he's given to me better than I received it, and to care well like a gardener for the things that have been entrusted to me. And I think that's a life's work, and I hope that I can be faithful in that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
I don't think so. Gosh, your questions have been so thorough. I've loved this. Thank you for having me on, Doug.
Yeah, it was an honor. It was great learning from you. And again, great to meet you. I've admired you from a distance for a long time. So keep making a difference, and maybe we'll do this again someday.
Thank you. Please, let's do.
Well, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Megan. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with her and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/363. And as always, leader, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups are simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together on a consistent basis for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. For me personally, mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 8 years. That's why I'm so passionate about this. And if you are interested in learning more about launching or joining your own group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds or email me at dougsmith@l3leadership.org. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote Thomas Paine, who said this. He said, "I prefer peace, but if trouble must come, let it come in my time, so my children may live in peace." And I love that. And hey, leaders, it's our job to make sure that our children and grandchildren inherit a better world. So let's make sure that we're leading well today. Hey, know that Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and we say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.